I hope everybody's doing wonderful tonight. Uh, I just felt a really strong urge to come on, and I just realized that today was Thursday. I don't know what I was thinking. I had thought it was Friday for some reason at first. I got up really late today, and I was sort of groggy there for a while after I got up. But yeah, I realize it's Thursday, but regardless. Um, hey Tommy, hey Into the Fray, and hey Brogan, great to see you all. Yeah, I had thought for a second it was Friday there for a bit. I got up, I was groggy, but yeah, I realize it's Thursday now. But even so, um, I'm going to do this anyway because I see even more narratives coming out that I have to punt kick, as well as some things I needed to talk about as far as it relates to war industries, things that are very important in that front, as well as some other issues that I needed to cover relating to why it is that I discuss China so frequently. Because I think that a lot of people fail to see just how dangerous that they really are as far as the CCP and their affiliated forces, uh, insofar as their armed forces with the enormous industrial might and financial might that backs them. Because people fail to see that a lot of the suffering and death that'll be coming to this nation will be at the hands of the CCP. Hence why I've done all the work I've done on this channel. Because the CCP is exactly going to do just that. In their pursuit to make America their colony of New China, as I call it in my in a lot of my work, a lot of people are going to fall at their hands or be forced into servitude at their hands, whether they are ready for it or not. And I think it's very important to warn people while there's still time to even warn people about this, because while everybody's looking at the left hand, which is this great reset stuff, people fail altogether entirely to see what the right hand is doing, which is what these Eastern elites are doing, like the CCP, the Russian political oligarchy, and all their affiliated allied forces of the Eurasian bloc, the BRICS bloc, whatever you want to call it, the Eastern bloc, who's getting ready very much so to obliterate us in a Third World War final showdown. So I think it's worth mentioning that is exactly why I do what I do on this channel, insofar as warning people. Because, and I'll even say this too. Yes, Russia is very big and bad too. Russia is very big and bad. They're very powerful. But they're not as powerful as China, not even close, which is why not to denigrate them, but I view them very much as being the junior partner in the Sino-Russian relationship. Don't get me wrong, though. Russia has a lot of power and might militarily, not only in their strategic nuclear deterrence, but also in terms of their conventional military power. They are a very powerful nation. They're the number 2 overall power. But China is obviously the number 1 power. People can't even fathom the vastness that is the Chinese war industry. People don't understand just the sheer number of massive factory complexes they have. and the fact that they're I mean, we're talking about a nation. We're talking about a nation that is the number one steel producing nation, the number one titanium producing nation, the number one tungsten producing nation. I mean, the number one chemical producing nation, not only in the scope and scale of their chemical industries, but also in their actual output of chemicals. Do people not understand that steel, tungsten, titanium, and chemicals has a massive role to play in war production? Do people not understand that these massive factory complexes that China have the combined output? I'm talking in terms of their aircraft, their land vehicles, their missiles, their shipyards. Do people not understand that their combined industrial output puts the rest of the world to shame? I mean, it puts the rest of the world to shame. Nobody comes close to China in their production capacity their ability to make and wage war is unparalleled. There has never been a nation with a peacetime war materiel output as China. And there, I mean, overall, what China has been able to do in peacetime is have the industrial output that hasn't even been seen since during World War II. And we're talking about in peacetime. This is peacetime still. Peacetime. And they have an industrial output that hasn't been seen since during World War II. Now, this is all a fairly recent development. I mean, overall it is. I mean, if you really want to get technical, a lot of these factory complexes that China began construction on, they to be fair, they weren't fully all online until, about 5 years ago. But what else did we see 5 years ago? We started to see the Pentagon's own supercomputers having us lose horribly every single solitary war sim to China. Every single solitary war simulation on their supercomputers have been lost to who? To China. To China. Okay, and also, I'll be fair in this regard too. Their ally Russia, China's ally Russia, defeats NATO in every NATO war game. That's well understood by now. That's well understood. So we lose to both. We lose to both. One in simulation, and the other in, actual war gaming between the NATO alliance, the whole NATO alliance. They lose. They lose horribly. Just like I've mentioned, that part of that was Britain and France exhausting their entire national stockpile of artillery shells in 8 days. In 8 days, Britain and France, just Britain and France, I don't know about Germany and Italy and the others, but just Britain and France, they're all the way depleted. They're depleted of artillery, howitzer, ammunition by day number 8. They are out of shells. Well, as a measure against that, let's take a measurement against that, shall we? In over 5 months of what's been happening in that certain Eastern European nation, Russia has lobbed over 3,600,000 shells, and they keep on going like the freaking Energizer rabbit. They keep going. So news media, who cannot explain it away because they told a lie, well, actually, they told many lies because they didn't just say it once, they've said it many times. If people don't have the memory of a goldfish, then they can remember that several months ago, media was saying things like, oh, Russia's running out of ammunition, Russia's running out of tanks, Russia's running out of logistics. Well, Russia is still sitting pretty. They haven't been dislodged, because if they were running out of those things, they'd have been dislodged. They'd have been dislodged. Nope, they're still sitting there, and guess what? They're still doing the same things. They're still lobbing an average of 20,000 howitzer shells daily. That's an average. 20,000 shells a day. Every day. And they haven't stopped. So because mainstream media doesn't want to look like a bunch of fools, because they are fools, and their lies have backfired and betrayed them to be some fools, they had to go make up new lies, like saying things like, oh, Russia has to, oh yeah, they gotta go borrow shells from North Korea. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah, we'll just tell them that they had to borrow shells from North Korea to keep doing what they're doing. Folks, that's the most asinine shit I think I've ever heard in my whole life. And I thought that the State Department saying what they said was really loony and out there. Oh, there's more narratives. I've already talked about these things that I'm talking about right now, but I'm going to go into some of the newer narratives I see, which needed to be punt kicked as well. But back to this, what I'm saying, they had to say that they had to go to third world North Korea, who is massively less industrialized than Russia, who has massively less stockpiles overall than Russia, to go get shells from them. Why would Russia, who has the second largest, after China, they have the second largest overall military industrial complex in the world, who has the output that is second to China. Plus, they have all their old USSR stocks of everything that was produced during the USSR period from after World War II and onward, plus what was made in the 90s all the way till now. Why would they have to go to North Korea, who has not even completely 1/8 the size of Russia's military-industrial complex? Why would they have to go to North Korea and ask for shells? That is the most asinine, just mentally feeble-minded argument, just made-up lie that I've ever heard in my entire life. It makes absolutely zero sense. It makes no sense. But I mean, I guess for the layman who doesn't know any better, I mean, they might believe something like that, but like your average, like John Doe, John Q, whatever, they might believe that, but to the trained eye, that is a really ludicrous statement to make. That is totally asinine, totally mentally retarded. I mean, if they had to ask for help, they wouldn't be going to North Korea for help. They would be going to China for help, because only China outproduces Russia in terms of overall war material output. Because China, Russia is 1/3 of the military industrial base that China has overall. I'm talking in terms of production. Their overall output, their scope and scale is roughly 1/3 if you average it out to what China's is. So if they did somehow need help, they would have gone to China for help. But they don't need any help. Russia can manage on their own. They really can. They have plenty. Because for them to continually do what they've done for over now 5 whole months and keep on going with no end in sight, Yeah, I would say that Russia, they've got this. They've got this. They've pretty well got this. Besides all that, it was a limited incursion anyway, with limited objectives, limited numbers of forces used, and they're still going. You know, they're going to expand it soon and probably bring it to a close, like they've talked about at their summit with their allies in Samarkand out there in Uzbekistan. But you know, for the time that it was a limited incursion, they've had this. They've had this, and they've managed quite nicely. I mean, what is 70 combat battalions compared to the overall size of the Russian armed forces? What is 65,000 troops compared to the 3.5 million that comprise the whole Russian armed forces? Well, it's quite frankly, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. Russia, you have to remember, is also the second biggest in terms of their tank fleet after China. I count storage numbers and everything when I say this. Russia has the second biggest tank fleet, the second biggest armored fighting vehicle, IFV, and APC fleet after China, okay? China and Russia are, for the most part, they're basically tied when it comes to their artillery corps, you know, like their overall artillery forces. They're tied in number of artillery pieces, both rocket and howitzer. But, you know, China has massively more APCs and IFVs than Russia, than really anybody, but they have more than Russia, and they have more AFVs, which are like your MRAPs and other types of armored fighting vehicles. China outnumbers Russia in tanks and in AFVs, IFVs, and APCs. They're, like I said, they're roughly equal in artillery. I think China might have a little bit more because of what they have, all the pieces they have in storage. But you know, Russia is the second overall largest in terms of their size of their ground vehicle forces after China. So Russia, only having sent in their 70 or so odd combat battalions, those battalions only brought with them their own vehicles, obviously, because every unit in every military has vehicles allocated to them for their unit's vehicles. So Russia did not, this is lunacy because the propaganda is so thick, but Russia has not lost anywhere in terms of vehicles that have been claimed. Because you have to understand, the Ukrainians are so over the top with their wartime propaganda that they come up with total bullshit like this Ghost of Kiev garbage. It's a patent lie. It's been proven to be a bald-faced lie. They've come up with other over-the-top propaganda saying that they destroyed 20,000 Russian tanks, which Russia doesn't even have a tank fleet that's 20,000. I mean, not unless you're counting all their boneyards in with their active tanks, but in their active tank fleet, Russia's active tank fleet is 12,500 tanks. There's no way in hell that the Ukrainians destroyed 20,000 tanks because Russia doesn't even have 20,000 active tanks. Their whole tank fleet, if you include their boneyard tanks, is now that's 20,000 grand final total. But most of those tanks in the boneyards are not working. They're not working. The engines won't even turn over. Yeah, sure. Maybe like you could get 2,000 or so, 1 to 2,000 back up into running condition, but that would take a lot of refurbishing efforts to do that. They had refurbished a small handful and given them to their LPR and DPR proxies. But by and large, those additional 8,000 or so odd tanks that are sitting in the boneyards are not in peak working condition. There is no way in hell that 70 battalions would have that many tanks with them, because that's impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible. 70 battalions would have a whole assortment of various vehicles, and all in all would only have a grand total of 3,000 to 4,000 vehicles, and that would consist of everything from tanks to APCs and IFVs to MRAPs to like your armored fighting vehicles, which would be apart from just the APCs and IFVs. You would also have air defense vehicles, including the radar vehicles that go with them. You would have artillery pieces of different kinds. Of course, the vehicles that carry the artillery supplies and shells and such. You would also have their fire direction control radars. You would have their FDC elements vehicles. You would have so many different types of vehicles that would come in with a force like that. 3,000 to 4,000 tops. So it's impossible. It is physically impossible for them to have destroyed 20,000 tanks like they claim, which is a total bullshit claim. That makes no sense. Let's see, what else? Oh, and by the way, Russia only ever reported it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 200 to 300 tank losses total. And some of those were not even total losses among their tanks. Some of those could be repaired and put back into service. So we're talking less than, 200-300 total losses. But that's besides the point. What I'm saying is all of these fantastical claims are all a pack of lies, okay? Now, I'm not talking up Russia. I have no skin in the game. I don't care one way or the other, but I'm just telling the truth. I'm telling the truth, and I'm telling you why it's the truth, using reality, undeniable reality, to explain why it's the truth, okay? But here's the new narrative that I was getting to. Now you have Ukrainians dressing up in Russian uniforms, and you have them pretending to surrender in big groups. You could tell it's a made-for-TV type of theatrical performance. Sort of like how when, what was his name? Gonzalo Lira exposed the psyops to get people to, and I'm talking about mercs, to get foreign mercs to come in to fight on the Ukrainian side. They were using people and using the same village that the Russians they'd pulled back out of from their feint attack, and they left a bunch of damaged Ukrainian stuff, and he showed how it was destroyed Ukrainian and not Russian tanks, and he explained why, using the actual details on the tanks. But they used this village for several different angle shots of a recruiting type of video, okay, to get people to come and fight for the Ukrainian side. Well, now they're doing it by pretending to have Russians surrendering in droves, which is total bullshit. You could tell it's fake. But these narratives, they're all the same. I mean, we know what to expect at this point. It's all a joke. And if people are picking it up and actually believing that and then passing it down the line, because these are mainstream media narratives, if they're passing it down the line and they still haven't figured it out by now that these stories are largely all false or made up, then I don't know what to tell them. But the day is coming, back to what the title entails, the Chinese finger trap. The day is coming where we will face our most dangerous enemy, which is China. Even as big and bad as Russia is, Russia doesn't even have anything on what China is, because their overall military size is nowhere even close or near to the gargantuan just enormity of the Chinese forces. They're nowhere even close to the size of the Chinese, okay? Their war industries are nowhere close to China's war industries. Nobody is. Nobody's even close in size of personnel or any of it or technology. I mean, Russia has good technology, but China has also superb technology and large quantities of it. They lead the world in lasers, directed energy. They're the world leader in robotics. They're the world leader in cyber warfare, electronic warfare, hypersonics. Russia has them too, but I'm saying that China they're on fractional orbital bombardment with their hypersonic. I mean, they have all of these advancements, and they're ahead of everybody else in terms of quantities of such weaponry, and also leading the world in their development. They are an extremely dangerous nation. Now, what I was saying earlier about them leading in certain productions like tungsten production, titanium production, and of course, steel production, as I've always told you, 1 billion tons of steel a year. Not metric tons, regular tons. But when you look at the tungsten, they produce 66,000 metric tons of tungsten. For some reason, they give metric tons for that. Now, that is a massive gap with the rest of the world. You know which nation is second in terms of tungsten production? It's Vietnam at only 4,500, whereas China produces 66,000. Vietnam is 4,500, and they're the next biggest producer of tungsten. Well, what does that mean? Do you all understand the applications that tungsten has for military production in terms of weaponry and types of alloys, armors? Do people understand how dense and powerful of a metal that tungsten is? Now, yes, while completely pure, 100% pure tungsten is extremely brittle of a metal, when you add a binding agent like nickel or whatever else, tungsten is an extremely hard metal. When you use it, like in tank ammunition, like sabot rounds, tungsten sabot rounds will puncture any type of armor that is employed on the battlefield. So what that means is that in terms of tank armor, the type of tungsten sabot ammunition that's out now, it'll rip right through that like a hot knife through butter. Okay? And China has some of the best tank rounds in the world in terms of their sabot ammunition, but also their depleted uranium ammunition to boot. And depleted uranium is another extremely hard and dense metal. Now, when it comes to like tank armor, now there's not a lot of tungsten overall that exists year to year in terms of like overall production, because a single tank is typically over 40 tons, typically, of just extremely weighty metals. Tanks are extremely heavy armored vehicles, okay? So you're never going to have a tank that's made out of a large proportion of tungsten. But what you can have is you can have a tank that might have like 0.5% of a tungsten within its alloy, like a tungsten alloy, like a 0.5% tungsten steel nickel alloy that would be an extremely strong metal as far as like an armor is concerned, because alloys, of different varieties are what they make these armors out of for tanks. Now you add like a small percentage of tungsten to the armor of tanks, or even titanium that's in there with it, and China leads the world in titanium production, at 110,000 metric tons of titanium. They're also the world leader in titanium production. And also they're 1 billion tons of steel, not metric tons, but full tons. You know, the enormity of their steel production translates to military production as well for armor and weaponry. And then they have the biggest chemical industry on Earth. Well, you can use chemicals for more than just creating the next best type of fertilizer or the next best petrochemical additives or whatever else. Chemicals are used in everything, and you know, it's the Chinese can make new types of or massive quantities of different types of explosive weaponry. You know, oh, and the other thing I forgot to say about tungsten bullets are some of the toughest types of armor piercing bullets for, you know, rifles or machine guns that there is. You know, I mean, it's better than these you know, steel penetrating core ammunition types that, you know, the tungsten bullets are some of the best bullets for anti-materiel purposes that exist. That's another use of tungsten as well, besides just tank sabot rounds. It's, you can miniaturize that concept in a bullet. And China produces, they're the world leader by far in tungsten production, but also in titanium and steel production. And they're the biggest, they have the biggest chemical industry. They've dethroned our chemical industry years back. And in terms of the scope and scale of their chemical industry, and also their output of their chemical industry, China leads the world in chemicals. They're the lead shipbuilding nation. They're the lead. They have the biggest and most advanced navy by far. They have a massive navy, way larger than Russia's navy even, and our navy, which is now the second biggest navy. Ours is. You know, China has the biggest, most advanced combat air fleet in the world. And when I say combat air fleet, I'm not saying overall air force. I'm not including trainers and AWACS and cargo planes and mid-air refuelers. I'm not including support aircraft. I'm talking strictly about combat planes. China has the biggest, most advanced combat air fleet. They have the largest number of combat aircraft, and their combat aircraft are exceedingly capable, very potent air weaponry, okay? So they also have the biggest, most technologically advanced army, and they have the largest land-based missile forces on Earth. Plus, being that they have the largest navy, I'm sure that bleeds over into their navy. I already made a video about all that before. It's back. It's a shorter video. I made one for the Russians as well. Those are back a ways. Now Russia also outnumbers us in the terms of missiles that they have. But China leads the world by far. And that's basically all category of missile at this point. But you know, China's obviously the biggest threat. And the Chinese finger trap comes into it when the détente period opened us up to the infiltration and subversion of our nation, of the whole Western world. You know, they played the West like the fool. They have all our crown jewels. They have all our secrets. They have everything. They have everything. They've taken all of our secrets, and not only did they use it to build themselves up, they also used it to improve upon Western designs. Do you understand that for the Chinese military budget, that cuts out so much of the costs of R&D, which means research and development? Do you understand how much R&D costs are cut out by stealing from your opponent? So the Chinese military budget, when you adjust it for purchasing power parity, meaning how much in China you can get for your yuan renminbi, even though it looks on paper to be a third of what we spend. It's really the same. It's really the same. And while we piss away, and I'm saying according to purchasing power parity, they are spending the same as what we spend. Even though on paper, in billions of dollars, it's a third. They've cut out the R&D costs by stealing from the West, and they've also are spending every bit what we spend anyway because of their purchasing power parity. While we piss away so much of our defense budget on stupid bullshit projects or other irrelevant things that usually end up being a flop anyway, I mean, they're over there using their money on things that are tried and true. They're stealing the best things that they've determined from us are the best designs that they should improve upon, while the political parasites, like you saw the one on the thumbnail as the puppet sitting on the lap of Xi Jinping, their emperor for life, their little G God man in China of the CCP, because they're an evil, secular, humanist, despotic police state. Okay, so you saw that. They have used their intelligence services to co-opt, coerce, extort, and get these political parasites, and some of them are even willing to be dupes for the CCP. Some of them are willingly bribed, apart from being caught in compromising nasty positions and coerced for it. Some of them are willing to be bribed to serve China and not America. So the ones that, regardless of how they were co-opted via extortion or bribery, they have served China by basically buying the designs, procuring the designs for military equipment that they know is not the best designs that we have. One example being, instead of getting more F-22 Raptors, which are amazing aircraft and tried and true, no, they went with this garbage, just total POS F-35. The aircraft that is supposedly the one to the be-all, end-all on everything, which does nothing well. Instead of having different specialty aircraft that specialize in ground attack and intercepting and fighter aircraft, air superiority, all that. Instead of that, no, they want one aircraft that does it all, but it does nothing well. It does not one thing well. Instead of using the F-22 Raptor, which is a vastly superior aircraft than the F-35 could ever hope to be, no, they went with this bullshit garbage F-35. I've said this for years on my channel and before I even had a YouTube. Okay, look, and then the Zumwalt came along, which has the most engine troubles I've ever heard of in a ship. It's garbage, and that's supposed to be our new generation of destroyer. That Zumwalt will never be able to compete with the Chinese Type 055, no matter how Western sources try to pump it up and pimp it and make it sound like it's some great ship. It's a garbage ship, and it cannot realistically compete with the Type 055 Chinese cruisers. Okay, it just can't. It doesn't have the weaponry, it doesn't have the systems on board, the electronic capabilities, the engines that the Type 055 has. It just doesn't have it. The radars, it just doesn't have it. And how all those systems are integrated, the Zumwalt is just not going to be able to fight. Okay, this thing's been plagued with issues. This thing's been plagued with issues. Not the least of which being the engine issues. So if the engines break down, in the middle of a sea battle, a between surface vessels, or if a submarine just takes it out or whatever, and the engines die, that thing is going to be a sitting duck, basically in the literal sense. It's just going to be floating in place, being drifted along, and it'll be annihilated. It'll be picked off and destroyed. Now, the submarines, China has the biggest subfleet in the world, apart from having the biggest overall navy. Its submarine fleet is massive. It's massive, and it's extremely capable. Although the age of the aircraft carrier for power projection is basically over with, China still has 4 aircraft carriers. Its 4th one is the finishing touches are being put on it. The Type 003 aircraft carriers, the super carrier that China has, and then they have the Liaoning and the Shandong, which are the 2 other aircraft carriers. Plus, China has the helicopter carriers. That it has 3 of them, with 4 more on the way of those, which are like the amphibious assault ship slash miniature carriers. Because of course, besides helicopters, if you had vertical takeoff fighter jets, you could operate those off of those too, and they would just become another aircraft carrier, not just an amphibious assault ship or helicopter carrier, but you could actually use it in the capacity of a full-on aircraft carrier if you were using it to have vertical takeoff aircraft operate off of it. So really, China has 6 carriers if should some very efficient number of vertical takeoff aircraft come and operate off of such ships. So, and I'm talking about the Type 075 amphibious assault ships that China has, slash aircraft or miniature aircraft carriers or helicopter carriers. It's all one and the same, but they're large aircraft carriers. They have 3. And one of which is a super carrier. And they have their 4th one on the way soon. The 4th is on the way soon. But again, aircraft carriers are not really for power projection so much anymore as they are for pushing out one's air defenses further from their coast. So that's how the Chinese use their aircraft carriers. They use it for pushing their defenses out, which makes more sense considering that there's so many missiles anymore that can sink aircraft carriers that China also has copious amounts of, like the DF-21Ds, the DF-26Bs, also their hypersonic missiles, like their DF-100 cruise missiles, which are hypersonic cruise missiles that would easily destroy an aircraft carrier. Plus, what submarines can do to aircraft carriers, it just doesn't make sense to use an aircraft carrier to sail it around the world for power projection unless you're using it against a nation who either doesn't have a navy or their navy's been destroyed by that point, so it doesn't even matter, if you use yours for power projection. I'm talking about aircraft carriers. And China absolutely can sink our entire navy. Look what the old, antiquated French Saphir sub did. I love this example from 2015. They sank a whole American carrier group single-handedly. And that is an older nuclear sub. China's newer subs, man, they would annihilate our carrier groups. And they have the biggest subfleet on Earth. Plus, they have plenty of surface vessels. They outnumber us in surface fleet, too. They went from a brown water coastal and riverine navy, back in the 90s, to a green water navy, to now they have a full-on blue water navy. Do you understand what that means? That means that they put so much of a priority into developing their navy that to go from a brown water navy, a littoral and riverine navy, which means brown water navy, if you ever hear that term, that's what that means, to a green water navy, which means they operate close to home, to a blue water navy that operates all around the world is quite a hell of a feat to achieve in 30 years. In 30 years. In 30 years, they've achieved that. Understand this. China deploys into the Atlantic. Chinese naval vessels have bases in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, and also, I would say, Canada, because it's well known that they have a base in Western Canada, so it stands to reason that they would operate from bases in Eastern Canada as well. Okay, but the Chinese Navy has done port calls in Europe, and Chinese Navy bases are in Cuba and in Bahamas. China does have a Bahamas base, okay? Now, all the Chinese-owned ports in North America and and even including in the United States, all the CCP properties that are inside the United States are all Chinese bases. This little story about the Chinese police stations, man, if people only knew. If people only knew that China has had for over 20 years now, that they've had ports and properties. They're the biggest property owner inside of the United States. They top Gates and Vanguard and what's that other one? BlackRock. They top all of them for property ownership. Do you understand what that means? That means that China has their military units on their CCP regime properties. They've imported them through the ports. They've got CCP-friendly truck drivers to truck them at night to all their little other bases throughout the country. Of course, the Club Ks, both the Russian and Chinese Club Ks, because China makes them too, they've been trucked in as well and placed only God knows where. Whether it was the Chinese-owned cargo yards, Chinese-owned solar energy farms that are conveniently outside of Air Force bases, especially in the West, or whether they're on Chinese-owned apartment complexes. I mean, who knows? Hotels, whatever else. Warehouses, it doesn't matter. Wherever they are, the day we get invaded by China, but also by Russia and the other allies of China, the smaller allies, because China's obviously the biggest due to their personnel size, the number of vehicles they have, the number of artillery. I'm talking in overall size when you combine everything that they have. They are the largest enemy that we have. They're the world superpower, hegemon, most powerful nation in the history of the world that's ever been seen. They hold the most gold on Earth at over 6,400 tons of pure gold. China could never be broke. It's impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible for several reasons. It's impossible not only because of their gold holdings, but it's also impossible because China is doing a petro-yuan renminbi and will reap the same benefits that we've reaped from having the petro-dollar scheme. They will reap all the same benefits. But China also has the world's biggest manufacturing base. At 40% of the entire world's manufacturing, all in China. All of it in China. 40%. Plus, they have a massive service industry. Don't people understand that China now has the world's biggest middle class, plus the biggest number of billionaires? Not to mention the trillionaire CCP regime elites at the very top. Xi Jinping and his top cronies. Don't people understand that? Do people not understand how wealthy and powerful China's become in just a 30-year span? Do you now understand why I repeatedly warn people about them? Do you see what I see? Do you? Because if you do, then you understand the danger we're in. You understand the danger we're in. Now, I'm going to be honest. When I was a young teenager and I started really getting into my, world military research, even before China became what they were today, they used to give me anxiety. Do you know why they gave me anxiety? Because they're a nation, at the time when I was growing up, they were a nation of 1.3 billion people. Billion. They had this enormous armed forces even back then. It was enormous. I'm talking about their army and their air force. I knew something inside of me told me that at a future time, this is going to be the most powerful nation on earth. Their human resources are enormous. 1.5 billion now? 1.5 billion. Let's compare their allies to it. Let's talk about like Russia and Pakistan. Because Pakistan's one of China's biggest allies, and so is Russia, obviously. Do you know Russia only has half of our population? Half of what America has? Let's put that into perspective against China. Russia, demographically, if they were to like mobilize all their military age males, they could only ever achieve, and I'm talking absolute maximum. I'm not even going to put a margin of error in like I did in my other video where I said, let's say 2 million of them could either be disabled or have like key jobs in manufacturing or whatever else that would prevent them from military service. Let's say they got all their military age males. Russia's maximum population for their like the top number of troops Russia could ever have would be 16 million men. A 16 million men army. Do you know right now, even before China's ever even done a draft or anything like a massive war mobilization, right now, peacetime, China has 29 million men under arms. 29 million under arms. 29. Almost 30 million. Do you understand? There are 20 million men paramilitary. That's all of them. That's their People's Armed Police, their national militia, which is like their paramilitary National Guard, their Marine militia, which is like their Coast Guard, and I guess you could say it'll be like a Marine Corps Reserve / Coast Guard sort of a element, I guess if you had to compare it to something. They have their National Construction Corps, which is essentially a paramilitary equivalent of what the military's, civil and combat engineers would be in a military, but that's a paramilitary force, a parallel military structure. Then you also have the PLA strategic reserves. That's 20 million right there of paramilitary. That's men under arms, okay? Then you have the regular military of 4 million with a 5 million man reserve. Russia comes nowhere close to that. Nowhere near that. Nowhere. Russia has 3.5 million. Don't get me wrong, Russia is a strong nation. They're the second overall strongest, but they're nowhere even close to China. Even the Soviet Union was scared of China. I mean, they were scared of a full-fledged war with China. They hoped that their tiny little border clash they had over islands in the Amur and Ussuri rivers wouldn't become a full-on war. And Russia, the Soviet Union was the other world superpower during the Cold War. But they were scared of China. Do you know why? Because of the numbers of people that China has. The numbers of people they have. That's what scared Khrushchev into saying that if the Chinese cross in force, we're going to have to nuke them to stop them because they have that many freaking people. Do you understand why I had the anxiety I had about them when I was a teenager? Because I knew that this day would come where they would be the most powerful nation on earth. And they sure are. They sure are. In real terms. Real numbers, real facts, figures, capabilities, and statistics. Everybody should realize the danger that America's in. All this tomfoolery going on in this country. We aren't going to stand a chance when they invade us. We aren't going to stand a chance. Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. Why do you think I do the documentaries and stories I do on this channel? Why do you think I do that? Why do you think I do that? It ain't just because, I can tell you that, it's not just because, it's to make people aware and see the things that are going on that they might have not ordinarily have seen because of all the heavy, thick psyops and propaganda that have them distracted with other meaningless BS. That's why I do what I do here. And my time here is coming to an end. Believe that. I'm talking about as far as doing the work I'm doing. I am going to quit YouTube, and I'm getting there because I don't have much, overall, I don't have much of my story left to go. And I'm going to try and pump it out as quick as I can so I can be done with this project because, again, as I've said many times, I'm a man of my word. I said I would do this, so I'm going to do it. Regardless if people watch it or not, listen to it or not. I'm going to finish this project, and then I'm done. But this is why this channel exists. Because people are looking at a bunch of other shit that doesn't even matter when they should be concerned about a nation that has the largest industrial manufacturing base, military industrial complex, industrial output, armed forces, the technological achievements and advancements that they've so rapidly been able to do, thanks in large part to the industrial espionage, the academic espionage that they've done in the West. Not just America, but also Western Europe. All that they took back to China, and they used it to modernize and build themselves up while infiltrating and subverting us to get us to tear ourselves down. It's like a set of escalators. One goes up and one goes down. We were at the nexus point where we were on our way down and they were on their way up. We were at the nexus point when China started surpassing us sometime around 2017, 2018. That was when a lot of these factories they started building to add to the factories they already had, by the way, but a lot of these newer, streamlined factories for their war manufacturing that they started building in the late 90s, a lot of them started to come online about that time. And that was also, interestingly enough, the same time that we started losing all the war simulations with China on the Pentagon's own supercomputers. Well, gee, there must be something to that. There must be something to that. I think I've found a lot of the things that are to that. The things I cover, a lot of that are factors, are nodes and factors that all have something to do with the outcome of us losing and them winning and destroying us and occupying us and colonizing us. We will be removed from being a nation. We will be removed from being a nation. A lot of our people and the people in the West in general, yeah. A lot of people are going to find themselves shanghaied, pardon the pun. A lot of people are going to have a new home in China. Yep. Now, you might end up in a rock quarry or in a Laogai where you sew tennis shoes. Who knows? But if you don't defend yourself and your family, you'll be in a Laogai somewhere in China. Believe it. Believe it. Just like in the stories, it'll be just like that. It'll be just like that. In fact, the last story part 17, covers aspects of that, maybe a little bit too realistic because I added some of my Iraq experiences in with that, how we dealt with EPWs. Some of it. I won't say what exactly, but I also combined that with what I know about them and how they would do things. Folks, I'm telling you. You better get ready. World War III is real. The fall of Babylon is real. Invasion at the hands of foreign nations, it's real. It's real and it's coming. A lot of people are going to fall by the hands of the CCP and their armies. They're massive, humongous, freakishly oversized armies with all the tech they have, all the advanced technologies they have that are going to all be integrated together in their new doctrines of hybrid warfare, whereby they all come together with Trojans doing much of the heavy lifting inside the borders. Trojan military units that are already embedded here, hidden here. They will go to their CCP properties, they will muster upon them and emerge from them and quickly capture their objectives because their properties, the CCP's properties that they purchased, have all been strategically purchased near their objectives. That's why it'll happen and go down so quick and be over so fast. The externals that are crossing borders, beach landing, and parachuting in, those are merely just the heavy-handed reinforcements coming in to help their Trojan brethren that are already inside doing the heavy lifting. Let me tell you something. It's been well established that there's Chinese troops in uniform in Canada and also in Mexico, Cuba, Bahamas, even the Panama Canal Zone. They've been seen in uniform. In fact, I showed a video of them doing a PT road march in Salt Spring Island in Canada. Plus, I put a video from this guy in Mexico who has seen them in uniform firsthand. He tried to give a tour of a military road that Chinese engineers built in Mexico for the future invasion of the United States. And he was only seeing just parts of what's coming. He hasn't even seen the full, just broad, massive size of what this invasion will be. He's only talking about parts he's personally seen that have to do with it. People need to get it through their heads. They need to get it through their heads what the real dangers are and whose hands they'll be suffering at. And stop worrying about a bunch of abstract shit that doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things. There's Western and Eastern elites, but the Eastern elites are going to comprise the 10 kings of Revelation. The New World Order will be an Eastern New World Order, not a Western one. And the beast will co-opt that and be the leader of that. Not a Western one. The devil doesn't want pansy leaders with pretty hands that never worked a day in their lives. These uber rich punks. He wants warlords, warlords that happen to also be uber rich, but they haven't let that, cloud their toughness, their personal toughness. So when you see people talking about the Chi-Com police stations, that's just the tip of the iceberg. They have no idea that there's been Chi-Com bases on CCP properties here for many, many years. Those police stations, I mean, yeah, it's not a good thing. It's definitely not a good thing. In fact, it puts everybody that talks bad about the CCP in danger. Why do you think my videos are so shadow banned? They hate this channel. They hate this channel. That's why my channel's so heavily shadow banned. That's why my numbers are stagnant and haven't changed for over a year. Well, gee, I should tell people something. Should really tell people something. Maybe it's because I'm talking about things that they don't want people to know about. They don't want to be well known of. That's why people better pay attention. That's why people better pay attention. I put myself at potential risk talking about all this stuff. I'm aware of it too. I don't have anything to gain. I have nothing to gain by doing any of this other than that it's the right thing to do. And I'm putting treasures away in heaven, not here. So that's why I do this. See what people are saying before I get off here. Who's all here? I have to push buttons. Hold on. Let me see who's in here before I get going. This has been a good stream. Really good. Very good. Yeah, again, I thought this was Friday for a minute. I was groggy, and I was like, oh, man, I better get on here. And it was around 7. I just got up not that long ago. Hey, Flotilla 555. Yeah, all my best work is in playlists. Not just my miscellaneous shows and my Friday shows, but also the documentaries, like the actual, documentaries that show the battle maps, that show what fourth generation warfare looks with real units and real everything on a map of a real place. Of course, I also add partisan elements and, people that are like rebelling or whatever, or reactionary civilians. But for the most part, I use real enemy units, real American units too, and I put them within the scope on a real battlefield, like a real city or real area, within the confines of fourth generation warfare. Like these different enemy units begin on CCP properties. That's where they all begin, and then they start capturing objectives to show what fourth generation warfare moves and looks like. And then the stories, including the audiobook, are merely a on-the-ground rendition, like a representation of how it actually looks on the ground as it's happening from a character/street level view, quote-unquote street level, like a character level view, seeing the things happening on the ground that are happening on the larger battle maps, like in the documentaries. So you're getting really a macro and a micro level view of it, like a microscopic view on the ground and a macro level view from above where you see the units moving on the map. Hey, Tommy, what's up, man? Angry Scandinavian and Miguel and... Well, yeah, China's in Europe too, Miguel. Chinese troops are going to help their Russian allies because they've already sent troops into Montenegro, Serbia, and no doubt Belarus, no doubt. All those Chinese armored formations that were doing military exercises with the Russians outside of Moscow merely months ago, well, guess what? They'll be going into Belarus to help Russia invade Europe. Even though Russia could take NATO all by themselves, they don't need any help, really. But China's going to help them, just like, Russia and the other allies of China are going to help China in North America. It's the same thing. It's the same concept, really. It'll be a world war in the fullest sense of the world. All Western nations and Western-aligned nations are going to be annihilated. And they're going to pull the Western elites and leaders out of their dumbs, their underground bunkers, just like how we pulled Saddam out of his hidey hole. They're going to do it. They're going to do the same thing, and they're going to humiliate them, and they'll end up in Chinese Lao guys, just the same as any ordinary people would that were captured. That's why people better be willing to defend themselves from the foreign invaders, because you don't want that to happen to you or your family or anyone else you care about. Self-defense is very biblical. It's very biblical. I've talked about this so many times. I get tired of talking about it, but it's in a lot of my more recent miscellaneous and Friday shows where I really cover the whole self-defense issue and why it's extremely important in the context of the Bible, but also in physical context in general, just in general. There's nothing wrong with protecting yourself. Nothing wrong. You have an inherent human and biblical right to defend yourself and your family or anyone else you care about or innocent people you come across. You're duty bound to protect those people. Any man who doesn't protect his family or provide for his family is no better than a non-believer, an infidel, whatever you want to call it. And that's in the word too, actually. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. I have to go look up the verse and everything to see exactly how it's worded, but it's basically it's the same thing for the most part. Hey, Miriam, what's up? And Kelly B, great to see you, Kelly B. And Romero, awesome. Glad you came in, Romero. And Unorthodox, yes, it is getting real, Unorthodox. And Miguel and Klaus. Buka down there in like Camp Buka, where we used to put all the Iraqi prisoners. Yeah, I know what Buka is. In southern Iraq. Hey, calling it as it is. Well, welcome, calling it like it is. You're more than welcome here. I appreciate you listening in for a while. Yeah. Speaking of the UK, China has done port calls in the UK, so it's already established that they deploy into the Atlantic. Their navy does, and their navy's the biggest, most advanced navy in the world now. They put us to shame. I wouldn't care what Western propaganda tried to say about the United States at this point. It's all over with. We're living off of our past reputation because true facts and figures always have us last, and that's a fact. That's a fact. We are not the same nation that we were even 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. I mean, hell, we're not even the same nation we were 5 years ago because China surpassed us 5 years ago in real terms. In real terms. Same with our European allies. You know, the UK, Germany, France, and Britain all used to be a lot stronger overall than what they are now. I remember Germany in 1990 at reunification. They had the second most powerful, largest military overall in Europe. But then they started scaling down. They started selling off all the former East German hardware and also a lot of West German stuff that they still had, obviously. I mean, they sold off so much of it. They slimmed down to where it's now dangerous for their national defense. Like, Germany is not the same power that it was back in 1990. Germany had a massive military. I mean, relative to their size, it was a huge military. Because when the East and West Germany's reunited into one Germany again, the former forces of the East and West for a little while there were amalgamated, for at least for a little while, and the number of hardware they had and personnel, it was large. It was a large military. It was the second biggest overall in Europe after the USSR, because for a little while a reunited Germany and the USSR once again existed on the same map of Europe, just like before World War II, when Germany was just Germany and the USSR was the USSR. I mean, there for a little bit, for almost 2 years, Germany and the Soviet Union existed once again on the same map of Europe. Of course, Germany wasn't as big as it used to be, but I'm just saying, just one Germany and then the USSR were on the same map of Europe, instead of like there being a West or an East Germany. There's just one Germany and then the USSR. But Germany, really, really shot themselves in the foot in terms of their military power. They're nothing like they were back in the 90s, because even for a little while there in the 90s, it took them a long time to, finally sell off all the hardware they sold off. It wasn't until about, after 2014 that they were really weak. They put what remaining vehicles they never sold off into storage, never to be used again, ostensibly anyway. And then they just have this mini, just small, puny military compared to what they once had. Because Germany used to have large armored formations back during the Cold War, massive armored formations of Leopard 2s and Leopard 1s, and I mean, Germany was powerful. I mean, but then they shot themselves in the foot. Same with the rest of the European nations. The UK, France, Italy, and Germany are all neutered. I mean, they've all castrated their military potential and power, and they'll never get it back. They'll never get it back, especially with the economic and energy woes that they're about to undergo. Realistically, Russia could whoop all their asses at the same time, and wouldn't even need any help to do it. But realistically, though, because China, the most powerful nation on earth, China, in real terms, has sent their troops to help Russia. Then you've got Belarus, you've got Serbia, and probably a few other nations I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure Albania, a traditional CHICOM ally, they'd probably switch sides and join China. I mean, realistically, I bet they would. I bet they would. China and Albania have long-running ties. Even though Albania for a minute seemed to be really pro-West, I could see them turning and once again joining China. They're like a flip-flopping type of nation. But anyways, that's besides the point. Russia could realistically take over Europe on their own, but because China's there, because Belarus has a fairly sizable army considering their overall size as a nation, I mean, they have 600,000 reserves and they have a 300,000 regular army, so it's almost 1 million troops. Sort of like what Germany's size was at reunification, but between Belarus, Russia, China, and Serbia, man, they could easily steamroll Europe. And we don't have enough forces in Europe to make much of a difference in that. We really don't. And even here at home, see, our military has been so downsized, especially in just the past few years. We don't stand a chance in hell, especially with this new generation of wokesters, these pansies. I mean, we don't stand a chance. The Chinese are killers, man. They're trained killers, and so are the Russians. And Russia has only done a limited, small incursion into Ukraine. They're not even trying. Russia's not even trying yet. Russia's not even trying. But the day they decide to go full bore, man, watch out. Watch out. Same with China. China hasn't even done anything yet. And they have almost 30 million men under arms. They have the largest overall amount of vehicles at land, sea, and air. Man, it's not going to be good. And their industrial capacity can replace whatever they might lose, could easily be replaced by the Chinese. The Chinese can easily replace anything they might have expended or lost in a world war. They're enormous. They're enormous. They used to give me anxiety for a reason, because I had a feeling that they would become the most powerful nation on earth. And here we are today. Exactly what I thought would happen has happened. People might still claim that America's, the top dog, but it's really not. It's living off its past reputation. America, once again, is the credit card that has nothing left on it. You still got the card, but you ain't got shit left on it. That's where we are. That's where we've been for the past 5 years. So I'm going to say my farewells to everybody before I get off of here. I hope everybody enjoyed being here. I enjoyed having you. Again, I'm going to try and finish up my story here pretty soon, at least as fast as I humanly can. I have to type it, and it takes a while to do that. It's not actually as easy as a lot of people might think. Hey, Miss Jen. I'm glad you made it. This will be a good replay for people who want to watch the replay. And Brogan and Into the Fray. I'm doing all right, Into the Fray. Well, thank you all for making it. I appreciate you all coming. Y'all have a blessed night.